Hello. Just before we dive into this episode of Unstratified Entertainment, we just thought we'd let you know that this is our answer to the question we've been trying to answer for quite a while, and that is how we talk about media and entertainment in archaeology and not have an overly bloated element to watching briefs sort of hanging on the back end of episodes. And so what we're going to be doing is talking about entertainment and archaeology and media in these episodes and releasing them in arrears for public viewing. So, in other words, the next Unstratified Entertainment will be released within the month that we record it for our supporters on Patreon, and you will get to see it, if you're not a Patreon supporter, on YouTube a month later or thereabouts. So it'll be slightly less immediately relevant, but hopefully just as entertaining to watch. I'm hoping that this means that people will flock to support us on Patreon just to see us rabbiting on about media and entertainment.
But apart from anything else, I'm sure everybody is dying to know what we think of Graham Hancock, because we haven't talked about that yet.
Oh, that's a bloody good. That's good. There you go. That's going to be our January treat for our Patreon supporters right there.
And later on for everybody else.
Yeah, in February. Yeah. So yeah, check it out if you're interested. Link below, and let's dive in to our thoughts on the Detectorists Christmas special. Hello and welcome to Unstratified Entertainment. Technically the first actual episode. The previous inaugural chunk of video that I sliced out of last week's watching brief as we were rabbiting on for far too long in that episode is, I suppose, technically the first one. But actually this is the real first episode of Unstratified Entertainment, because Andy actually knows that he's in it, which is fantastic.
You're presuming that I knew I was in most of the other things that we've done over the years.
That's true. Yes, I might have just been recording you without you knowing all these years, and you know that I'm gonna have to get you to sign some sort of document now as a waiver for the use of your visage.
Your people will be hearing from my people.
Precisely. Speaking of your people and my people, did you have a pleasant Christmas into New Year's type period?
We have, thank you, yes. And I hope you have too, and I hope everyone else out there, whatever you've been celebrating, I hope it's been a good one.
Absolutely. It's been very very pleasant, very merry, and a good time for reflection.
And I suppose we're also, it's a good time for reflection as well, for seeing as we're in that really weird space between sort of Boxing Day and New Year's Eve, where everyone is basically eating leftovers, and eventually starts craving food with some spice and flavour to it, and that kind of thing. That's when the hangovers wear off.
Absolutely. Well, yes, in that sense, in that sort of Twixmas spirit, we are here to talk a little bit about having watched the Detectorists Christmas special. It was a Boxing Day, actually a Boxing Day release, and I did watch it with the family, with the in-laws, and Mrs. Soup here at Soup Towers. Basically, because I promised I would. You know, you sort of convinced me to, and I was like, "Oh, go on, fine, I'll watch it." And well, I've been told it was wonderful.
The Guardian, no less, said it was the best thing that was likely to be on television over the Christmas holiday.
Well, you know, there you go. I mean, okay. To kick it off, what I would say is it was a very charming, very well-made piece of TV. It was very similar, as you might expect, I think, in tone to the recent Wurzel Gummidge outings, Mackenzie Crook. Absolutely. As a writer and as an Englishman, as an English filmmaker, has a real love for the sort of English pastoral landscape. He loves that liminal space between the wild and the managed farmland and the villages and towns that weave their way across parts of the south of England in particular.
But forgive me interrupting, Mark, but do I detect a but coming here?
Well, what I was going to say was Well, what did you
Go
think
on,
of it? What did you think of it?
we're among friends.
What did you think of it? Go on.
What did I think of it?
Yeah.
When I read, Archae social media and metal detecting social media was full of it in the run up and then afterwards.
Yeah.
And everybody's using phrases like "loved it," "charming," "love," "beautiful," Ella J, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And I wondered if they were watching the same show that I was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
and the problem here. The problem is I haven't seen any others. That's the problem. I'm just going off this one episode. Right. So okay, I mean, I suppose for a start, it was interesting. Does it Lance, the character who played by Mackenzie Crook? Is that him or?
No, that's Andy. But
Andy. Lance is Toby.
But new viewers start here, especially if you haven't seen the show before. Basically, what Mackenzie Crook has done since 2014, over 3 series and a couple of specials, this latest one being the second Christmas special, is take a classic British comedy trope, which is the odd couple. And the odd couple, in fact, English language comedy trope. But the odd couple, in this case, are 2 metal detectorists, one called Andy, played by Mackenzie Crook, who also writes and directs the series, who is a working class bloke, qualified archaeologist. He qualifies as an archaeologist in the course of the first series, who is married to a teacher called Becky. They have a young son. And the other half of the old couple is Lance, played by another wonderful British actor called Toby Jones.
Okay.
Who people might be familiar with in all sorts of...
he's everywhere, yeah.
He's
even in the most recent Indiana Jones trailer, as we pointed out last time.
Indeed, and we'll maybe come back to Indy later. Yeah. But Toby Jones plays a character called Lance, who is a much more difficult man. He's he works in sort of light industry, drives forklifts and that kind of thing, and he has an estranged daughter. He has at the beginning of this series, he's semi-detached from his girlfriend Tony, and the thing that binds the two together, brings the odd couple together, is metal detecting.
Yeah. And there was quite a good joke at the beginning where the reviewing a potential permission that they've got, and the landowner keeps on saying, "So you're the metal detectors, are you?" And they're like, "Detectorists. We're detectorists. The detector's in the car."
Yeah.
So yeah, I think they clearly have a passion for it, and they come across a site which they quickly think may be of great interest. I don't suppose we want to necessarily spoil the premise of the show.
No spoilers here. We should add that this all takes place in a fictional place called Danebury, which is sort of on the border between beautiful rural North Essex, South Suffolk. Very beautiful part of East Anglia.
Yeah.
A very historic part of East Anglia.
Yeah.
And they are members of what's meant to be a long-standing metal detecting club, largely older people, and they meet in the local village hall and have lectures, drink cups of tea, and show off their finds to each other and so on.
Yeah.
So that's the premise, and it's on one level, it's about people's relationships with the past.
Yeah. But also as well, I mean, one of the first things that they find on their excursion is a clay cup that was made by Potted History.
Indeed. Wonderful Potted History. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this, in the summer, he turned up at one of the events where Mrs. Soup and I were meeting with the public and doing fun activities. And he sort of said, "I've just made something, but I can't tell you what it is." And I was like, "Well, why tell me? Why tell me that you?" But I now know why he couldn't tell me what he'd made. But yeah, so it goes on from there. But also as well, there's an interesting line at the beginning of this show where you have Toby Jones's character say, "I'm not interested in crockery. I want metal," and it goes goes from there, really. He's clearly interested in trying to find metal. Now, this might be in the context, obviously, of being a metal detectorist, in the context of having had previous successes. I don't know. Again, I haven't seen the series in full, but I do know that they did at least make one big find that made it to the British Museum. So maybe he's trying to sort of to continue that run of good luck, or to whatever, relive past glories. But there was an interesting, as far as I could tell, tension between these friends that was reflecting a tension between the archaeology and its historical potential, but also its intrinsic value and worth, i.e., if you find a piece of gold, that's much more interesting than finding a piece of pottery. Now, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, I think arguably one of the things about this particular episode that's really quite laudable is the fact that it arguably, if you think about it, highlights the importance of non-metallic archaeology, and of the fact that actually what they're looking for could be much more interesting, valuable, or even just worthwhile scratching your head over if it's not made of shiny golden stuff. So I thought that was interesting, and I thought the way that they played with that theme, it wasn't central, I don't think, but it was certainly there if you wanted to see it.
Yeah, look, okay. I think central to this is a very deliberate nod in the direction of William Blake and William Blake's Jerusalem and that view of the English landscape. And that whole mythology. I'll say no more than that. Go and watch this. People should need to watch the show.
Yeah. I think you've gone further than I was going to go in that sense, but this contrast between types of archaeology and the types of stories that they can tell, I think was interesting, and the fact that you also had, and again, I don't know how far this has been the case between these two characters in the past. You also had Toby Jones's character being very cagey about whether or not they wanted to tell their fellow club members, let alone the portable antiquities scheme, about early finds that they were making on the field. Some hints maybe of potentially a battle site, for example. What did you make of that? 'Cause, I mean, you've already hinted at the fact that you were wondering whether or not you were watching the same series as our colleagues have been. What do you make of how the story unfolded and what it said about archaeology and metal detecting in particular in the UK at the moment, or in England at the moment?
I think it's very absolutely right to say in England, partly because the regime in England and Wales is different to that in Scotland and in the north of Ireland and on the Isle of Man and so on. What did I look? And again, it's difficult to talk about without too many spoilers, but I think in this particular development really of the storyline, which is really, it's a story arc that, just like in Game of Thrones, we followed the characters since 2014. There are things happening in this show which I think are tougher and darker and more ambivalent than anything that they've done up till now with these particular characters and this particular setting, which I think actually made it rather more interesting in many respects than previous shows. Look, I'll put a case to you, and which is that the first of all, the whole story opens with what looks like a clandestine meeting between two parties, might even be spies. These two vehicles are seen in a landscape approaching each other down dirt tracks. And it turns out that the odd couple, Mackenzie Crook and Toby Jones, Lance and Andy, have got a new permission. Now, again, anybody who knows anything about metal detecting knows that permissions are the be-all and end-all of the hobby. If you haven't got a permission, you can't metal detect, because you'd be doing it illegally. You'd be trespassing and committing theft. So, but at the same time, permissions, and particularly productive permissions, productive permissions, final consonants. Productive permissions are rare and prized, and often metal detectorists are very, very cagey about where they're actually getting the material from, even reporting it to the PAS.
Yeah.
Right. So you're immediately in that kind of territory, which again feeds the motivation where the Lance character, Toby Jones's character, is cagey he's not wanting to let other members of their own club onto the permission, let alone the archaeologist. It's setting up opportunities for mystery and portrayal from the very start. And the other thing that you need to know going into it, or otherwise, and again, I think people who say it was wonderful, it was delightful, and so on, are forgetting that the Andy character, for example, who's the archaeologist, who's the responsible metal detectorist, who wants, in the course of this particular story arc, wants to work with archaeologists, wants to report stuff to the Portable Antiquities Scheme.
Yeah.
Reminding views the Portable Antiquities Scheme has been set up with regional finds liaison officers, where members of the public, usually metal detectorists, but not exclusively, can report any archaeological find that is found outside of an archaeological excavation, formal archaeological excavation.
Yeah.
And they also assist in the administration of the Treasure Act 1996 in terms of finds that come under the Treasure Act, particularly goldy, shiny, as
shiny things. To it
as they refer to it in Detectorists. But Mackenzie Crook, the Andy character, the responsible metal detectorist, the figure, the symbol of responsible metal detecting, working with archaeology. In the course of this show, he's not working in archaeology, and the reason he's not working in archaeology is, back a couple of series, he got his first job after qualifying with a contracting archaeological unit on a developer-funded site, and he was told to ignore a piece of Roman archaeology. If I remember correctly, it's a mosaic pavement that turns up on this developer-funded site, because he's told by the site supervisor to ignore it because it'll slow down the developer.
Yeah.
And he is so disillusioned, he just quits there on the spot. Now, we in archaeology know that kind of thing happens.
Yeah.
And so, the developers had their way eased by archaeologists in some circumstances. And so, it's this is a series that's already shown the ability to be asked some tough questions about motivations and circumstances. On the other side of the fence, in the previous series, we had a metal detectorist who went to the dark side in the course of looking for a German aircraft. And was wanting to break the law, and particularly the Protection of Military Remains Act. So this is this bucolic rural idyll with an odd couple at the centre of it is actually a lot tougher than a lot of people take it to be. People see two very attractive fine actors working with a fine script in a beautifully shot circumstance, in a beautifully shot environment, and they see it as a beautiful shiny artifact. It's not. There are the bits of the there are chips on the on the jewels.
The thing is, you say it's tougher and or harder than it might appear to be. For my money, it actually does an awful lot of whitewashing of some of the issues that we know exist within the metal detecting community. The rally is portrayed as a community event, not a money-making event. Although obviously they're making money to protect the hall, apparently, that they meet in. But primarily,
which is the plot line. It's a classic Jeopardy plot where the building where the club meets is being eyed up by a developer, and the local council say basically you've got to pay for it to be sorted out or you lose it.
Yeah, so it could be,
the land will be sold.
In other circumstances, it could be a church roof or that kind of thing, or a school building, or But there's no. It is basically it's a summer fair where people get to turn up and detect on this property that is a permission, whereas we know not being specific and not going into anything that's actionable, we know that there are groups who have questions to answer over how they manage their finances. At some point in the future, we may well return to those and talk about them.
Maybe.
We know that metal detecting groups frequently, unfortunately, have problems within their communities with regards to issues of, for example, diversity, or indeed actively not wanting diversity. And yet in this show, we have the guy who accompanies Andy in an act of discovery. Again, I'm being very vague if people want to watch the show. He's a South Asian descent Englishman. And finally, as well, in this show, they considering you say it's a bit more hard-boiled than it appears, they imply that you're licensed, that the National Council of Metal Detectorists, NCMD, can take away your license if you're not careful. No, they don't issue licenses. The metal detecting in the UK, in England, is an unlicensed prospect. So I, in some ways, I feel as though that the lack of research there lets down aspects where you have archaeologists saying, someone who trained as an archaeologist feeling as though they can't trust their colleagues to do a decent job, or at one point, for example, saying there's no money in archaeology. Being some real hard-boiled truths are also being served along with some unquestioned loveliness surrounding what actually is a very complicated hobby. And again, I'm not saying it's illegal. I'm not saying that everyone who partakes in metal detecting is problematic, but we know that there are problems, and none of that turns up here. And the only other thing I would say is that there's a really weird moment where there's a claim that precious metals require moisture-controlled environments to be stored. No, they don't. They're there because they're unreactive. That's why they're going to be in the ground to start with. So it's interesting in that sense, because you're praising it for a certain amount of hard underbelly on top of underneath this rural idyll. But actually, I would say that they could and should have done more to portray the complexities of metal detecting. That said, though, they did have Lance in conflict with Andy over whether or not he's going to report to the PAS in the first place. So at least at the very least, they do show that as something which is true.
Yeah, but look, a couple of things. First of all, I think the most personal thing I could say in response to that is, we're not dealing with a documentary about metal detecting. We're dealing with a prime time, broadly speaking, sitcom edging into comedy drama.
Yeah.
And as I think Mary Poppins once said, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
Well, what medicine and for whom? That's my point.
Well, the medicine is that you have one of the leading characters. And again, I won't, not too many spoilers, but watch the show. But you have one of the leading characters getting very, very close to going full Lempster Horde illegal.
Okay. Yeah. You were saying it was almost like a Gollum moment, my precious.
There's a sequence where the character is shown at home, hunched over a table, lit by one of those sort of angle poised magnifying glasses, looking at the piece of gold which they haven't told their supposed best friend and partner about, let alone anybody else, and is actually lied about. Who then tries to pass it off to a relative to look after.
Yeah.
In something in what I said that there are deliberate allusions to spy dramas.
Yeah, Cold War stuff. Yeah.
Cold War stuff. There's almost a material drop, a material exchange in a local pub.
Yeah.
The response to that request actually precipitates the rest of the plot.
Yeah.
And that character is rowed back from the edge. But look, I think I mean, a couple of things. I say that a sitcom, edging into comedy drama. You alluded to the lines about nobody about there not being any money in archaeology. Now, obviously, particularly after this year and the Badger report, which we reported on a few months ago.
Yeah.
Um, I I think I can say quite frankly, in our house when Andy and his wife Becky, who's in a different job and a more highly paid job, are arguing, are talking about their income and whether they can carry on and so on, and the dialogue ends up with Andy, I think it is, says there's fuck all money in archaeology,
Yeah.
and Becky retorts, beautifully played again by Rachel Sterling. The character Becky responds, "There's fuck all money in fuck all."
Yeah. Well, staying at home sitting on your ass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that dialogue struck very close to home. I would imagine many archaeologists, particularly archaeologists with partners who work in a different sector of industry or public service or whatever. That was a very, I thought, painfully true piece of dramatic writing, actually.
Yeah.
Making a very sharp point about pay in the sector.
Yeah, well, and I should say,
and why will people do it?
Well, exactly. Yeah, well, precisely. And if I suppose one of the answers that comes out of this show is the fact that if you're going to do it, then you're probably going to be wanting to do it because you have a certain ethical, moral stance towards the material that you're investigating. But I mean, I should acknowledge that this episode with you comes hot on the heels of having released an interview I did with Dr. Sam Stein, who's a producer in TV, and one of the things that I was really reminded of in that conversation with her, that I very nearly fell foul of, and in that sense I represented my arguments for the sake of the viewing audience, my lord, just now, is that actually, as a friend and colleague, David Petts reminded me, this is fiction, and so getting really wrapped up in whether or not this fiction is presenting a reality that might lead some people down the wrong path is a whole myriad of turns and steps and what ifs and corners to go mentally when you've just been presented with a TV drama. What if someone, for example, I've seen some people on social media saying, what if someone watches this on the same day that they've just received their first metal detector, and then they go out and they think, okay, right, let's not report this fine to the PAS. Again, for that, and I suppose in that sense, going back to the interview with Sam, and do check it out, guys, if you haven't watched it. It was really interesting.
Absolutely, definitely so.
Is just to remind yourself that actually it's not your job to watch and police the thoughts of the viewers of the drama that's being put out. If you have a problem with the drama, it's probably a good idea to try and get involved in production or to more productively reach out than just criticizing it. But that said, though, it was hard to watch, because what was also interesting was that with my in-laws here, they couldn't see the objectionable elements, if that's what I mean. They loved the physical comedy, for example. They loved the tension that came out of aspects of how the story unfolded, and then paired with beautiful cinematography and a subtle use of CGI. They actually were utterly swept up in the same way that I was. For example, towards the end of this episode, there's a wonderful montage showing an object's life, an artifact's life through hundreds, probably 1,000 years or more, and I thought that was fantastic. It was almost reminding me of precisely that magical moment that we all have as archaeologists and as detectorists, sorry, metal detectorists, when we pick something up out that someone hasn't touched for, for many human lifetimes, or even just a lifetime. So it was interesting for me, in so much as it was, as we've seen, it was a very laudable piece of television. But I suppose a question would be, how can we productively manage these observations and these professional fears that we have? Given that, and again, going back to the interview with Dr. Sam Stein, given that what we have here is a group of professionals in the form of archaeologists and a group of professionals in the form of storytellers. And indeed, for some people, as you often say, archaeologists are storytellers. So people who want to tell the best possible stories. Yeah. How can we better interact with pieces of drama like this? Because I mean, as much as I think you were definitely going into it far more enthusiastically than I was, even you come away from it just thinking, well, actually, this wasn't unalloyed, saccharine wonderfulness. There are questions here. But you seem to be a bit disappointed in how some of our colleagues have interacted with it, or not.
I'm not disappointed with the production. I mean, you can pick holes and say, yes, the implication was that a non-treasure object needs to be declared to the portable antiquities scheme. It doesn't.
No.
Now I take issue with you about the depiction of a rally, because there are traditional club rallies still, and there are rallies where the accounts are declared and the profits do go to good causes. And you can't show everything in the course of 75 minutes.
No, that's true.
And I think as well, as I say, there is an element of people seeing what they want to see rather than what was actually been put in front of them. And that's because people respond to drama drama and comedy and fictional writing. And let's not forget, this is a fiction.
Yes. Yeah.
A fiction and a confection.
Yeah.
But
also a very accessible reality, though. And so I can see why some people ask those questions.
It is beautifully accessible, and like all the best kinds of writing, it can make something that's quite obtuse sometimes, or quite morally nutty, crunchy, approachable, and understandable. And so I think. I mean, apart from it, people need to try it, really. And I would say, it would certainly help in terms of the backstory and the setup of this particular show if you have knowledge of the characters and their trajectory over the previous 3 series and previous Christmas special.
Well, my father-in-law has offered us his collection of the previous episodes, so we will be watching them at some point, certainly.
Yeah.
But I suppose to conclude, or to try and come towards a conclusion, for my part, I would say it was a very good piece of television, high production values, and also at the same time a sort of a charming, familiar, warm look at an existence that is close to nature. The way it's presented is very kind of, I say, there's a sort of almost a spiritual element that for me reminded me very much of Mackenzie Crook's work as Wurzel Gummidge, and this scarecrow character in a field, and how he connects to Green Man himself, in fact, and that was lovely, and it can be enjoyed on that level. But I suppose one of the reasons that we are reinvigorating this interaction with media as archaeologists is that we also can't always ignore that sort of critical eye, and hoping for an ever better balance, an ever more perfect balance between storytelling and, I suppose, a responsible, approachable portrayal of professional concerns. And as we've talked about throughout this year, there are different ways of approaching these questions. And I imagine we're far from solving that interaction. I imagine archaeologists are going to continue to slightly grind their teeth when certain types of film and television come forth. But all in all, I would say very watchable, and it's intrigued me and also Mrs. Soup enough to go back and watch previous episodes, just so we know how these characters got to this place. I mean, what are your final thoughts on this show?
I very much echo that. You know, first of all, go and watch it. Apart from anything else, just at an aesthetic level, it's a beautifully produced, beautifully acted, beautifully shot piece of television.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it is a fine product at that level. I think, you know, I would hope that an independent writer would create something that, while people with particular knowledge of what they're writing about might take issue, might broadly speaking enjoy, that they'll take issues with certain aspects as well. Yeah. You know, it is not, you know, if I'm writing something, it's not my job as a writer to please anybody. It's my job as a writer to create a viable script. And so, and as you said, as he's shown with Words with Gummidge and with this, Mackenzie Crook is a very fine screenwriter with a particular sensibility for showing the English countryside. And as I said right back at the beginning, that, you know, there are elements in this one that go right back through William Blake and the mythology of rural England. Mm-hmm. And that is a you know, it runs through the whole of the rest of the series, like the, you know, Letters Through Rock. Yeah, Seaside Rock. Yeah. You know, it's an underlying theme that animals and birds are constant figures in the landscape. So you know, and it's often just a little cutaway, a shot of a deer foraging at dawn. You know, beautiful little cameos of showing these as living landscapes where things other than things that are just done by humans happen.
Yeah.
You know? So, you know, at that level, it's a delicious artifact. You might, you know, as I say, in this particular one, I think there is a toughness and a darkness about the parts of this particular story, which they may take further, or it may just be left there hanging for the imagination of the audience and people that get it. But for example, two things I just say at the end. One is that you are left with a distinct possibility that one of the characters that you've known to grow and like a lot over the course of the series is actually fundamentally, at one stage, and certainly at one stage in their metal detecting career, was a hawker, was on a site without permission.
Yeah, yeah.
And possible proof of that, either that individual or another individual doing the same thing was on the site previously, and it's not made clear.
No.
But that's a subtext that runs through the whole show with specific evidence for that. The second thing I would say is that in an absolutely brilliant conceit and homage and reference, this particular Detectorist special, what Mackenzie Crook has done is show one of two things. One is that, as many of us have suspected all along, the adventures of Dr. Indiana Jones are actually completely invented, right? Indies are either completely fictional, or that storyline is drawn from the parallel universe. I'll leave our viewer to work out which is which.
Okay. That's okay, fair enough. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I didn't realize that was a central conflict at the heart of archaeological storytelling, but apparently so. Yeah, which timeline are we in? Yeah.
It's there in the text.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you guys for watching at home. Thank you for your time, Andy. This is the night before New Year's Eve. So also thank you very much to your family, and also frankly to Mrs. Soup for putting up with us recording this evening.
Absolutely.
Comments below. Do let us know what you think of the series. Try and keep the comments spoiler free for a while at least anyway. And we'll see you guys in the new year with a look back and forward. We'll probably do an hour long or something special early in January.
We'll be doing our impressions of Janus, the two-faced god.
Well, actually, if I look this way, can you look? Can you look that way?
Give
other way.
Oh, sorry.
Other way.
Give our viewer a preview.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yay! Looking backward and looking forward. Thank you, guys. Until next time, do take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.